Example 4. Boggs inherits the remnant of a farm from his father, most of which has already been sold for a housing development. The remaining acreage, which is his father called the swamp, is currently used for fishing and duck hunting, but Bloggs decides to drain and develop it as a residential area. However, scientists at the local community college have determined that Bloggs' property is part of the wetlands and nourish local streams and the fish in the town's river. The town council, hearing of Bloggs' plans, passes an ordinance bidding, uh, forbidding the draining of wetlands. Bloggs sues for the right to develop his property, or failing that, for an order compelling the town to buy the property from him at the price that would prevail if development were allowed. Example 5. A county ordinance requires houses to be set back 5 feet from the property line. Joe Potatoes buys some heavily wooded land in an undeveloped area and builds a house on it. 10 years later, Fred Parsley, who owns the adjoining lot, has his land surveyed and discovers that Potatoes' house extends 2 feet over the property line onto Parsley's property. Potatoes offers to compensate Parsley for the trespass, but Parsley rejects the offer and sues to have Potatoes relocate the house in conformity with the ordinance. These 5 examples capture some of the most fundamental questions that any system of property law must answer. The first and second examples ask how property rights are initially assigned. Orbitcoms apparently bases its ownership claim on having placed a satellite in the orbit in dispute before anyone else. This claim appeals to a legal principle called the rule of first possession, according to which the first party to use an unowned resource acquires a claim to it. How might this rule apply to the mule born on the remote Wyoming meadow? The general issue raised here is, how does a person acquire ownership of something? The second example also asks what kinds of things may be privately owned. Orbitcom asserts that a satellite orbit may be privately owned like land or a musical composition, whereas Windsong feels perhaps that orbits should be commonly owned by all and open to all on the same terms, like the high seas. Economics has a lot to say about the consequences of resources being privately owned, commonly owned, or unowned. The third example concerns a problem sometimes known as incompatible uses. May one property owner create a stench on his property that offends his neighbors? In general, the law tries to prevent property owners from interfering with each other, but in this example, as in many other cases, there is a trade-off between competing activities. Is the cattle feedlot interfering with the homeowner by creating the stench, or is the homeowner interfering with the feedlot by moving nearby and seeking to shut it down? The legal outcome turns in part on whether the stench constitute a nuisance as defined by law. Economics has a lot to say about this determination. The fourth example, like the third, raises the question: what may owners legitimately do with their property? The difference is that example 3 concerns a dispute between private owners, and example 4 concerns a dispute between a private owner and a government. The specific question in example 4 is whether a property owner can develop his land according to his own wishes or must conform to restrictions on development imposed by a local government. The general question concerns the extent to which government may constrain a private owner's use of her property. We will show that economics has a lot to say about the government's regulating and taking private property. In the last example, one property owner has encroached on the land of another, but that encroachment has gone undetected and without apparent harm for many years. The question raised by this example concerns the remedy for trespass. Should the owner be denied a remedy because the trespass has persisted for so long? Alternatively, should the court award compensatory damages to the owner, or should the court enjoin the trespasser and force him to move his house? As we shall see, economics predicts the effects of various remedies and thus provides a powerful tool for choosing the best one. We shall also see why courts prefer the remedy of issuing an order called an injunction to stop trespassing or otherwise interfering with the property owner. These examples raise these four fundamental questions of property law. 1. How are ownership rights established? 2. What can be privately owned? 3. What may owners do with their property? 4. What are the remedies for the violation of property rights? In the next two chapters, we shall be using economics to answer these questions. Traditional legal scholarship on property law is notoriously weak in its use of theory, or at least in comparison to contracts and torts. Superscript 3, which reads, in contracts and torts, there was a classical theory that dominated American law at the beginning of the 20th century. These introductory chapters on contracts and torts describe these classical theories. There was, however, no classical theory of property of comparable coherence, detail, or stature. Instead, there is a long philosophical tradition of analyzing the institution of property at a very abstract level. Some of these philosophical theories of property are described in the appendix to this chapter. This fact contributes to the feeling of many students and that the common law of property is diffuse and unorganized. Through economics, it is possible to give the subject more coherence and order. In this chapter, we concentrate on developing fundamental tools for the economic analysis of property, bargaining theory, public goods theory, and the theory of externalities. In the next chapter, we apply those tools to a large number of property laws and institutions.